All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Jazz Museum in Harlem, the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, and our flagship series, Harlem Speaks. My name is Greg Thomas, and on behalf of Loren Schoenberg, Executive Director, and Christian McBride, Co-Executive Director, and the staff and board of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, I welcome you. Thank you for coming. Excuse the brief delay, but without any further delay, we're going to go right to our discussion with Mr. Antonio Hart, alto saxophonist, professor, and a lot more, as you will find out. Let's give Antonio Hart a hand. All right, man.
All right, brother.
Okay, we always like to start at the beginning. When and where were you born?
Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay, when?
September 30th, 1968.
Okay.
Yeah, the mic isn't.
Oh, all right. Well, it's for the camera.
I'll speak louder. I'll try.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we're gonna have to project.
Okay.
If we can get would it be possible to get a mic? Well, we'll try to project now.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, why don't you repeat that? When and where you were born, and
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, September 30th, 1968.
did you all hear that? Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So, tell us about your parents. What are their names, and what can you tell us about your mom and dad?
Well, I can tell you a lot about my mom, not much about my dad.
Okay.
I grew up single-parent home.
Okay.
My mom's name is Berthenia Davis, and she raised me the best way she could, you know, being a single parent, and she gave me all of the necessities, the things that I needed to survive, a place to live, food and clothes,
Right.
And most importantly, love.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And any siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
Okay. All right. So, what was it like growing up in Baltimore?
Baltimore was wonderful. It was, you know, as a child, we did a lot of great things, playing outside. We stayed with my grandmother a lot, so she had a pretty huge house with land, and the neighborhood kids, we would go behind the house and turn over rocks and, you know, see garden snakes and raccoons and try to chase the rabbits and shoot BB guns and, you know, everything that kids did, you know, want to stay outside until the street lights, you know, went off, and then you had to go in the house and you couldn't wait for the next morning to go back outside again.
All right. So, it sounds like that you had a good time with your grandma. Tell us her name and tell us some more about her.
Well, this is my mother's mother. Her name is Willie Mae Strickland. Now is Willie Mae McLaurin.
Okay.
She's the best. All the stereotypes that you could think of grandmother.
Good stereotype.
Yeah, all the great stereotypes of, you know, when it was time for me to get a beat and she would stop my mom. you know.
Some of the grandparents, they end up easing up.
Oh, it was
on
wonderful.
The grandchildren, yeah.
Yeah, because I saw her get into my aunt, but to me, she was great.
Okay.
Very serious Christian woman. Always, in fact, my grandfather was a minister. So the beginning of my life,
Her
I spent.
husband?
Yes, my grandmother's husband. Most of my beginnings were in the church. You know, Sunday, sometime during the course of the week, and so she was very devout. Still is very devout Christian, and I think a lot of the blessings that I've had in my life are because of her prayers. And the reason that I'm here and haven't gotten into a lot of trouble probably because of her prayers.
Okay. Tell us your grandfather's name.
His name was William Strickland. He passed, say, 1982. But he was working class gentleman. In fact, it was funny because he worked in what you would call, like, not a junkyard, but he would repair refrigerators and stoves and things like that and sell them. Right. And my uncle worked with him, and they had a red truck. It was like Sanford and Son. It was just like Sanford and Son. It was amazing. Just so he didn't call him dummy and whatever stuff. But when I think about that, I always laugh. I was like, wow, my grandfather had the Sanford and Son truck. You know, that was nice.
So whenever you hear that Quincy Jones theme, do you think of it?
Whenever I see the picture, that's the first thing I think about.
Dun, dun.
Yeah, and my uncle that I'm talking about, his name was William Strickland Jr. He's really probably responsible for me playing jazz. Because he was like my male role model, and I would go into his room all the time, and he had posters of like Joe Louis up on the wall, and he would be reading books and telling me about, you know, the African American cowboys, and he would give me some history, drop history. But while he was doing that, he had like Joe Henderson or Freddie Hubbard. You know, he had all this stuff playing. I didn't know what it was. That was Uncle Junior's music. You know, and he was a brilliant man. Unfortunately, coming up in that time, dealing with Vietnam and not having the opportunities, you know, life took some turns for him, but he was always supportive of me. And like I said, probably one of the main reasons that I played his music is because of his influence.
Okay. Now we'll get back to Uncle, but let's talk about schooling. Tell us about any kind of music curriculum in your schooling, whether we're starting elementary or junior high school, as we kind of transition right to music, you know.
Well, in elementary, as far as back as I can remember, I remember them having an assembly, and they had a band on the stage, and this guy had like 5 or 6 of this thing in front of him. They were saxophones, obviously, and he played it, and right away I was like, I want to play that. I didn't know what it was. I had no clue. It's just when I heard it and saw it, I said, that's me. So I found the band teacher, and I asked him, could I play? And he said,
This is elementary school.
This is elementary school.
Okay.
I was about 7, maybe.
Wow.
And I asked him, could I play? And he was like, you're too young. You have to wait a year. So
They didn't put you on the recorder?
Nothing. It wasn't, you know, Baltimore public schools, unfortunately.
Because here in New York, they put you on that recorder, you know?
Yeah, I would have loved that.
Okay.
So, you know, I waited that year, and coming back, he said, you could definitely be in the band, but you have to get a reed, you know, and I didn't know what that was. So I said, Mom, I'm going to play in the band. I want to play in the band. I need a reed. So we go to the mall. This is when you could go to the mall and go to the record store, and they sold reeds. That was amazing. Yeah. And we got a reed, one reed. And
you didn't get a box?
Come on, bro. I was lucky to get a reed.
I got you. That's what he told you to get, right? Yeah, right. Okay.
And for a week, I would put the reed in my sock, right here, held it in my sock, waiting for him to come, because the music teachers taught at several different schools, so I had to wait for him to come back around.
Right.
So the day came that he arrived, and he said, "You got your reed?" I'm like, "Yes." And I pulled the reed out of my sock. It was all chipped up and broke. And he was like, I don't know if it's gonna work, and I felt crushed. I was like, oh man, are you sure? So he put it on, and he played a D on the saxophone. And he said, okay, we can try it. And he said, show me the fingers and play it, and honk. And I was like, yes. And that was really the beginning. And you know, playing in the elementary school band, learning a couple notes here and there, and I still wasn't quite sure that was the route I wanted to go. I just knew I wanted to play the saxophone for that particular time, because before that I was really into art and drawing. And that's really what I spent most of my time doing. I used to started out with the comic book heroes, and then I would just, because we had all this land and trees, I just started drawing landscapes and tennis shoes and stuff like that. So I thought that was going to be the route I was going, really art, but I liked the saxophone too.
Did you totally give up drawing, or do you every now and then now?
I kind of gave it up to focus on the music. Right. I wish I didn't, and I talked to Mrs. Heath about, you know, I had bought a sketchbook and some pencils, but with the schedule that I have now, I don't have time to focus on that, because that's a discipline that you really have to pay, you know, attention to.
It's interesting. I was talking to somebody recently, and isn't something how Duke Ellington, visual arts. Miles was serious about it. Miles Davis.
Wayne
Shorter, Tony Bennett. You know, so it's interesting how the different arts, I guess, kind of correlate in an artist's life. Okay, so that was elementary school. Okay, you're learning basic notes, basic songs. Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. So what happened when you got to junior high school or middle school? Right.
Well, I went to middle school, and of course I looked for the music teacher, and I got a chance to play in the band. But this was rough school, really, really rough school. I up to that point, I really loved school.
Okay.
But when I got to junior high, I won't name the school, but you know, it was intense.
Seventh grade or sixth?
Yeah, seventh
okay.
through ninth.
Mhm.
It was a really rough time, fighting all the time. Cats wanted to fight you because you did your homework, or cats wanted to fight you because the little girls liked the way you played the saxophone.
Let me stop you for a second, because we're recording this for the archives of the Jazz Museum. So 100 years from now, you know, folks are going to be able to see this. And you stating the fact of and the reality of what you went through, it's not dogging out the school, it's what you went through.
Right.
But for the sake of documentation.
He wants me to dog the school.
No, I want you to say the name. I want you to say the name so we know.
Okay, I mean, it's not a big deal. It was a school called Garrison Junior High. Garrison Junior High School.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right.
Like I said, it was a rough environment, and it made me not like school. But the one thing that I did have that made school worth going for me was the fact that I could pick up my saxophone and go into the band room and play. So in the band room, you know, I learned more about the saxophone, but not much more.
Okay.
Only because I practiced, and you know, I would try to learn the little songs, and my teacher did the best he could in that kind of environment again.
Right.
So what happened was, in the going into my ninth grade year, in the city of Baltimore, they cut out all the arts programs in the school.
What year would that have been?
It's like, I guess, what's that, 86, 85, 84, 82, something like that, 81,
Yeah.
82.
Because in the mid 70s, mid to the late 70s, that happened here in New York.
So at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do, because if I didn't have music in the school, I wasn't going. You know, I had made up my mind I wasn't
So that
going
was the
back.
one thing that was...
Yeah, because unfortunately, the education in the schools, for me, it was like daycare for older students. You know, you really didn't learn much. You just went there from a certain time of the day, and you did what you did, and they passed you along. So, and I can say that with knowing what the other side is like, which I'll explain a little later. So that ninth grade year, I was thinking I didn't want to go to that school. And a friend of mine who had graduated got accepted into the Performing Arts School in Baltimore, which was
from
new.
the same school.
Yeah, which was new. And he was a saxophone player, and I guess he had told his teacher about me. So somehow I got set up with an audition.
Before you go there, because that's I know where that's going to take us. I do want to ask you this about walking the streets of Baltimore, because you mentioned about how they tease you for getting good grades, that kind of thing. But in certain communities, like Philadelphia, at one point here in New York, and other urban settings, musicians at some point were highly respected. So that I remember reading about Grover Washington Jr. in Philly, saying that even in the rough neighborhoods, he would have his instrument, and folks would be like, yeah, you go ahead, you keep playing that. Was it like that in Baltimore?
Yeah, because the guys that I grew up with, they were the guys on the street doing what they did.
Right.
You know, but I was accepted because I had an older cousin that was part of that mix, and I would try to hang out with them, and they were like, "Nah, man,
All
you
right.
know, you're you know, do your thing. You know, you don't really fit this mix, even though I tried my best to get up in there.
I'm glad that they did that.
You know, so yeah, they were very supportive, and even later on, I'll share another story where guys were just really, really cool with me.
Okay. So,
Not knowing that that's what I was going to do in the future,
Right.
but they were very, very kind to me and kept me out of trouble.
okay.
So again, I got an audition for the Performing Arts High School, and I couldn't really read music.
Okay.
I knew a few scales, and so I'm nervous, and I called my friend. His name is Timmy, and I said, Tim, you know, I need some help, man. I don't know what to play. So we had this book called the Universal Method book, which is kind of a standard classical kind of book, little etudes and scales and things like that. So
It's blue with
yeah,
red.
blue book with the red and white,
Right.
exactly. Thick book like this.
Right.
So we turned to the page. He said, "Let's learn this song, Hungarian Dance Number 5." Dun 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 da da da. So on the phone for 3 hours, he taught me the song. So I mean, I could read the notes, but the rhythms and things like
Right,
that.
right.
So I got it to a point where I could play through it. that night, so all night long, that's all I did, Hungarian dance number 5. So my mother and my father took me to the school, and this is like right after Fame came out, right?
Yeah.
So all I hear in my head is like, Fame! Oh, and I'm like, wow, I'm going to Fame, this is killing. So, but I'm really nervous, so
Yeah.
we go into the building, and they tell my parents to wait there, and they take me up into this room, and it was 3 teachers in there. One guy named Chris Ford, Dr. Ford, who became my private teacher, Carolyn Fowkes, and somebody else.
Okay.
So I get in there, and they ask me some questions, and they asked me to play some scales, and pretty much I played the scales. So they said, what are you going to play for us? I said, I'm going to play Hungarian dance number 5. So I'm playing it, and maybe like measure 5, I'm playing a wrong rhythm, right? So the teacher's like, can we play that again? And I played the exact same way. One more time. Exact same way. He said, are you reading that rhythm? I said, no. He said, well, how are you doing? I said, well, I learned it last night over the phone. So at that point, I was like, let me go back to Garrison, because it's not going to happen. And wow, through the grace of God, I got accepted into the school. They accepted me raw. And it's interesting because a lot of the students that went to that school are students that did have private lessons and
Before they
they got there. Yeah, so they were prepared to be in that kind of situation, but they accepted me, and that 9th grade year I went in a little late because I was still at Garrison, but they accepted me in.
Right.
And
So what? Your the second half of your 9th grade or something like that?
Maybe it was the first month. I missed like the first month of school.
But you transferred.
Yeah, I transferred to the School for the Arts, and that was total culture shock on a million levels. One, going to school with different ethnicities, which I've never had. It was all black schools. Seeing little girls run around in leotards. Wow, that was wonderful. And having teachers, having facilities, one, having new textbooks, and having teachers that were on your case. Like my first year, I went to summer school because I failed like English and I failed French or something like that. And they were like, look, this is what it takes to be in this school. If you don't step it up, you can go. There are other people that want your spot. And then many times I was on my knees like, God, just, please I don't want to leave this place. It was the first time I had a private teacher. Once a week I would have lessons with my teacher, being exposed to music lit, so the European tradition, all the different composers, learning counterpoint, harmony, and things like that, as well as, like I said, very, very serious academic classes. We had a teacher, his name was Mr. Gross, and Mr. Gross would be like, everybody feared Mr. Gross. He said, I don't care who you are. If you're a senior, I will fail you. And we were terrified of this guy, and he failed me a couple times, but he made me a better student. And we had to do the soliloquy of Mark Antony from Caesar, Friends, Roman Countrymen. We had to learn that. Now, you had to write it exactly how it looked in the book, line for line, and you either got it right or you failed. That was it. So you talking about, like, that's what I did. I wrote it like a million times, and I got my A. We had to read books. We had, like, tons of vocabulary words. It was just, like I said, the way I think education should be. It shouldn't be like a special school like that. That should be just standard.
Right.
Right. So I got to see like what I thought was like not a good education situation to like what I thought was the best. So within those 4 years, like I learned a lot academically, musically. I learned so much. I learned what it was like. Well, they told us what it was like to be a professional because we always held at high standards because we were visible. We always had to sing somewhere. We had to be in the choir. We had to play somewhere, saxophone quartets, competitions. So they told us that you had to be on time. You had to be a good person. You had to be prepared. Assignments had to be in. So I got in the habit of doing that. So by the time I graduated, going to college, I already had that work ethic.
Okay.
So I graduated from School for the Arts.
Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So you're taking private lessons in addition to your academics, in addition to, I presume, various bands you in.
Wind ensemble.
Okay.
We had, wasn't jazz. That's a good point. We didn't really have a jazz band. For like a year, we had a gentleman, Gary Daly, who was a trumpet player. I think he played with Manuel Ferguson for a couple years.
Okay.
And something went down at the school and he was gone, so we didn't have a jazz band. And I had realized like halfway through that I didn't want to be a classical saxophone player because that was our curriculum. I was playing all the classical pieces, the Ibert, the Glazunov, the Boza, all that stuff. That was our curriculum.
Right.
And my teacher, he studied in Paris or Bordeaux with Jean-Marie Landex, who's a student of Marcel Mule. So that was where we were coming from. And he played saxophone, he played flute, he was playing bassoon, all these instruments. I was like, I don't want to do that. I just want to play saxophone.
Right.
And then we would go to see the symphony orchestras, or we would go to see operas, because they really exposed us to a lot of things. And I didn't see any black people in those orchestras or in the bands. I was like,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
I don't feel connected to this. And
Well, by virtue of that, but how did the music feel to you?
no, I love the music,
Right.
but I felt restricted on a certain level, basically because well, my musical level was so low. That's one thing.
Okay.
And I had a problem with everything being written on the page. I mean, everything. Every note was written down, dynamics, phrasing, and it had to be played this way, and it's always played that way.
So regimented, rigid.
Yeah. What I realize now as I've gotten older, there is room for expression, personal expression, but still it's expected to be played a certain way.
Right.
And I remember listening to the radio station, the black college in Baltimore, Morgan State University had a station, or they still do, WEAA, and that was primarily a jazz station at the time. And I would turn that on, my uncle's room, and I remember hearing the first guy that I fell in love with was Grover Washington Jr. That's my man.
Okay.
Will always be my man. I got to meet him once, and that was like meeting Charlie Parker for me. But I would listen to that station, and I remember the first recording that knocked me out was something called Blues Up and Down, and it was Sonny Stitt and Gene Ammons. And I was like, what is this? I was like, what are they doing? This is incredible, and it resonated in my body.
Right.
And then I looked, I was like, oh, these two black guys doing this, right? You know?
Yeah.
So what I would do when my mom gave me allowance, the first thing I did was buy records. You know, so I think when my mom saw I got the bug, she bought me a Benny Goodman record, and she bought me a tape of Billie Holiday, and that was cool. But my first record that I bought was The Best of John Coltrane. So it had Naima and Giant Steps, and you know, all the hits on there, right? I played that, and I was like so upset. I was like, "What is this?" You know, I spent $10 on this. What is, you know?
It was just out.
It was beyond
Right, beyond
where
your
I
comfort.
was at that
Right.
particular point. So I would take the record, and I would do everything to it. You know, have the record spin and take a pen and let it draw around the record, and I would scratch with it. You know, I was like, well, you know.
Okay.
And maybe like maybe about a year after that, I put it on. I was like, oh, you're crazy. Now I can hear what that is. So that was it. Once I got that bug, I was like, this is something that I want to do. You know, so I started doing the research, trying to find out where I could continue studying and study this art form. And
This is while you're in high school.
yeah, so you know, later on, like 11th grade year, that's when I knew exactly this is what I wanted to do. And I bought the Charlie Parker Omni book with, you know, the solos and trying to play the stuff what I couldn't play, but, you know, listening. I remember buying a Johnny Griffin record and, you know, just whatever I could get recordings.
Do you remember which Griff?
Oh, man, I don't remember which one it is.
Was it Return of the Griff?
Nah.
Okay.
I remember I bought it because he looked cool on the cover. He had on like these black sunglasses, and he had that. You know, it was like I was like, "That's a cat. I gotta, you know, I gotta get that record." And it was a great record. I still have all those records.
Okay. Let me ask you something, because one of the things you said, a lot of things you said resonate with me. I mean, maybe you could tell, and maybe folks out there could tell that I have a little familiarity with the saxophone because I used to actually play saxophone. Yeah, I studied, you know, in high school and was in different orchestras. I'm not orchestras, different ensembles, and through college. But what I experienced that was so similar to you was the effect that it had on my body. Back in the late 70s, I would get up in the morning, I would listen to WRVR and then later WBGO, come home and listen to it if I felt sad, if I felt, I mean, everything. And it was such a physical thing, and I think it had to do with like going through puberty. I mean, I made it sound a little flip, but I mean, do you think that that's a valid theory, that when you're going through puberty and all those changes and you're milking in, you're drinking in all of this music, do you think that that's what led to, in part, led to your choice that this is what I want to do?
I'm sure that's a theory. I never thought of it that way. I just, like I always try to tell my students, it's not about the scales. It's not about all the stuff that you study. It's about what you feel. You know, that's the first thing. The first thing that led you to playing music or studied any kind of music is how you felt.
Right.
You didn't listen to whoever you listened to and said, wow, that was a G7 raised 11, sharp 9,
That's
13, alter chord. You didn't think about that. You was just like, wow, I felt that.
Right.
You heard Miles Davis on Kind of Blue and he played that one note and you're like, oh, that's it.
Right.
That's it, you know. So I'm sure that what you're saying has something to do with it. But for me, like I said, coming from the other tradition, this was one that I connected with on a lot of different levels, because it was something that I could identify with looking at.
Right.
And then it was something that I felt connected to spiritually, inherently. And then there was something that connected me with the fact, or intrigued me with the idea of improvisation. You know, for the first time I could have a structure and play what's written on the page, but now I get to be the composer within that composition, which I didn't know anything about, but I still love the idea of doing that.
Okay. Charlie Parker Omni book, which I got to. Gold with that black image of bird on the cover. And you said you tried to play that. Lord knows I did too. But did you get did you put the LP on and slow it down so that you could hear it half speed?
Bro, I didn't have that stuff. I was
You
a
didn't
poor
have,
black kid from Baltimore, bro.
That's right.
You know,
right. Okay.
I didn't even have the records. I had tapes of some of that stuff.
Oh, you didn't have a record player?
I had a record player, but I didn't have those records. You know,
Right.
that was prior to me getting into people like Charlie Parker and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I had tapes of that and I would play, but the idea, I didn't even know that you could slow stuff down.
Okay.
I would just play it over and over and over again and try to get it. That's and I know there are a lot of devices that are available now, but I always tell my students, well, like, just do it. Your ear gets stronger every time you do it. It's nice that you can slow it down and do that now, but why not do the work? You know, my teacher, Master Heath, and James Moody, all those guys, that's what they did. They wore records out, you know, and that's why they could hear, you know, the way they hear.
Right. Okay. All right. So 11th grade is when you made your decision. This is what I want to do. You had heard Gene Ammons,
Sonny
Sonny Stitt,
Charlie Parker,
Grover Washington,
yeah.
John Coltrane.
Yeah, you know, Freddie Hubbard and
Right.
Joe Henderson. A lot, you know, I heard a lot of people with my uncle and on the radio station, and I knew that's where I wanted to go. So I started doing research with the different schools around the country, colleges that you can major in jazz, and I applied to University of Miami, North Texas, Berkeley, and somewhere else. And none of them accepted me, but Berkeley. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it partly because I wasn't playing jazz yet, and partly academically I wasn't that strong.
Okay.
You know, my SAT scores weren't that great.
Right.
In terms of schoolwork, I did well, but and I took the prep course and everything. That just wasn't my thing. So, fortunately, Berkeley was the one that gave me a shot, and that was the best move in the world, actually, for me. And so I applied, and they said come up for an audition. And my best friend at the time he was going there. His name is Mark Gross, great alto player, on the scene, plays all over the place. And he was already at Berkeley, so my mom put me on the train. It was like a long ride, and he picked me up and took me to my audition. And for my audition for Berkeley, I played the Iber.
Okay.
I played a classical piece. So they were looking at me like, why do you want to come here? I was like, because I want to play jazz. They were like, but you playing claps. Like, that's all I know.
Okay.
You know, so, you know, I tried to play on the blues or something. I had the emotion, but I didn't have the theory.
Right.
And I could hear a little bit, you know.
Right.
So I got in, got a little scholarship, and that's the beginning.
Okay.
That's the beginning. You want me to go from there?
Let me ask you this, since you're very familiar with the literature. And you teach. How would you describe, for those who are here and are listening, what's the distinction between the European classical style of saxophone playing and jazz saxophone playing?
Wow, that's really broad and depends on what period of classical music you're talking about.
But there's not a big
and the
literature for the
players.
saxophone.
Yeah, but
You know.
there are definitely different schools of
Okay.
playing. You know, if you
Okay.
go, like I said, go back to the French tradition, which is Marcel Mule. There's a certain way that they play, a certain way that they produce sound, colors, vibrato. You know, the speed of the vibrato, and mainly the lightness of the sound.
Okay.
You know, but then as you come in time, you get more contemporary players. That concept has changed. The idea of sound and the material that's being written for that.
Okay.
But there is a correlation. If you listen to my hero Johnny Hodges, and you listen to Marcel Mule, very very close. Now Johnny Hodges' vibrato is a little slower, and Marcel Mule's vibrato is a lot faster. But in terms of quality of sound, it's very very close. Two beautiful, gorgeous sounds.
Right.
You know, so when I tell my students to play the etudes, they don't want to do it a lot of times. I'm saying it's music. You know, it's teaching you how to phrase. It's teaching you how to look at a sheet of paper and how to phrase a melody or a section. Thinking dynamically, how to play dynamically, how to play even in different registers of your horn, because you might go from a lower note that's soft and you have to jump to that higher note, and there's a tie there. It's not staccato. Da da da. How do you play that? How do you play that in tune? How do you play it so it sounds musically? So when you can do that, then you go play one of those gorgeous melodies, and then you apply the same thing. It's all music. It's the same.
Right.
You know. So
Okay.
that's what I do in my lessons. I try to suggest the ones that want to do it that they do that as well.
Okay. So you mentioned Johnny Hodges. I'm so glad you did, because when I first heard you, man, you were with Roy Hargrove, and I was like, wow, this young cat, he's really into Hodges, man. I could hear it so strong. So tell about when you first heard Johnny Hodges, and what did that do for you? What did it make you feel?
Well, what happened was I was at Berkeley already, and I had probably one of my greatest teachers named Andy McGee. And Mr. McGee, I studied with him because he was like the older teacher. Like he was like, you know, I had other teachers before, Joe Viola, the classical side, my mentor, Bill Pierce, but they were like, you want to get into that older tradition, you got to go with Andy McGee. So I took lessons with him, and I remember he picked up his tenor one day, and he did this thing that I heard on recordings, some technique. And I was like, man, show me that. Yeah, I want that. He was like, no. He was like, figure it out for yourself. And you know, I'm a young, arrogant kid. I'm like, look, man, I'm paying you thousands of dollars. Show me that. And he was like, no. He said, you want to know what it is? Go to the used record store around the corner. Go get Johnny Hodges. Go get Tab Smith. Go get Marshall Royal. Listen to those players and figure out what they're doing. So that's what I did. I went around the corner to this place called Looney Tunes, and I met the guy who owned it. I think his name was Lewis. I said, man, whenever you get any Johnny Hodges records, save them for me. So I got all the Wild Bill Davis, the Hodgepodge, all the stuff that he did, double play, the stuff he did outside of the Duke Ellington band,
Right.
and all those different players, Johnny Bothwell, people I'd never even heard of, these of that kind of tradition.
Right.
And I would just listen for like about 8 or 9 months. I stopped listening to my man at the time, Kenny Garrett, because that was my main dude at the time. I stopped listening to all the influences that I had before, and I just focused on that. And I just fell in love with that sound. I'm still chasing it.
Right. What about Benny Carter?
Mr. Carter, I discovered him a little later.
Okay.
And I love him too. I actually got to play for him on his 90th birthday, so I got a chance to meet him, and that was a great honor. And different quality of sound, different approach in terms of harmony, and an approach, and a different kind of emotion.
Huh.
Like when I listen to players like Cannonball Adderley or Charlie Park or Johnny Hodges or Mr. Heath and all these players, every player has a certain kind of spirit that goes along with them, and I listen to them for that. When I want to go church and I want the clapping and I want the spirit, the Holy Ghost, I'm listening to Cannonball.
Cannonball, absolutely.
When I want to be in love, when I just want to be like in this zone of more where it's just floating and it's just everything is perfect, that's Johnny Hodges.
That's right.
When I'm listening to like passion, sincerity, a lot of different things. That's what I get from Mr. Heath's music, you know, because I know him as a person and I know what his character is, and it comes through in his music. Like, different players affect me in different ways. John Coltrane, a lot of people listen to John Coltrane for certain things, but when I listen to John Coltrane, I hear somebody searching to connect with the creator. I feel that yearning and that desire to be in communication in his playing, you know. So that's kind of how I listen to music.
Yeah, I kind of feel that when I listen to Train, that like some of those cries, you know, it's not just the technique. I mean, it's that he had a certain cry in his playing.
You know, we've gotten so into technique and harmony and rhythm. I say this to my students all the time, and you forget about the things that make music what it is. Space, dynamics, articulation, the groove. You know, people will sacrifice having a beautiful sound for being able to play all these rhythms and harmony and stuff like that. And that's how most people are playing the music today. So the audience, you know, you might be impressed with a saxophone player or a trumpet player that has great technique for 1 or 2 songs. Then after that, it's over. And you get the one guy that comes in and plays that one note, and it's like, it's over.
Right.
I've seen it happen so many times, you know? So that's what drives me. And not to say that I'm not into what's going on now.
Right.
You know, Dizzy Gillespie says 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the present. Right. I try to stay that way, but I find the older I get, my feet are more in the past. You know, like Louis Armstrong, are you kidding? It doesn't get any better than that. Sidney Bechet.
Right.
You know, all those great players I was playing for my students the other day, Ma Rainey and Betsy Smith, you know, Son House, like the blues, trying to get them, because I'm like, when people think about blues, they think about 12-bar blues. And we get students and people coming from different cultures. I said, blues is not about a form. It's about a feeling, about a story. It's about emotion. And if you're going to study this music, jazz, you got to study the people that created it. And you got to know the conditions which this music was created out of. If you don't know, if you don't go back and check out the music from Africa and understand about the migration, the slave trade, about Reconstruction, about civil rights and all this stuff, if you don't know that, you can't play jazz. With that kind of feeling. With
that
this,
kind of feeling.
You can play it up here if that's what you call it, and it's academic.
Right. Okay. Now, all right. I happen to agree with you. However, we know that the music is an international music. We know that there are people around the world, in Europe and different places, that hear the music and it touches them, and that they're inspired to also play it with their own inflection. You know, I mean, because that's what the cultural context they come out of. So what would you say about, I mean, we're going to come back to chronology, but what would you say about those from other places, say in Europe, for example, and what they're trying to do in terms of the jazz tradition?
There's nothing wrong with that. You have to play what your experience is. You have to play what you feel. But if you're trying to play this music and you're calling it jazz, this is just my opinion. If you're going to play this music, you still have to know who the people are that created it and where it came from and the conditions in which it comes from. There's no way of escaping that. You know, it's like saying, I'm going to play your music, but I don't respect you. You know, I don't care. You know, this is our jazz now. I mean, music is for everybody.
Right.
You know, whatever you feel, I don't have a problem with that. If you feel it, take it and run.
Right.
Because when it's all said and done, when you're in your grave, you want to have a smile on your face saying, I played the music the way I wanted to play it, not the way Antonio wanted me to play it.
Okay. But
I take offense to anybody that calls themselves a jazz musician and they don't know why Louis Armstrong is important. And they just tell you Louis Armstrong, they spit names out to you. Why is he important?
Right.
Not because of Hello Dolly and Wonderful World. You know, this guy changed the way the music was played, the way it was felt, the thing we call swing.
Right.
You know, and if you don't know that, if you don't know why Duke Ellington is important, you know,
Right.
if you don't know the great composer, you don't have to know everything about them, but you have to know why they're important.
Right.
To understand the evolution of the music. And there's a campaign going on right now where people are not doing that. They're starting here,
Right.
you know, and they're trying to do a lot of changing in the music. You know, all my students, and I tell them, you can do whatever you want to do. I don't care, but this is a traditional jazz program, and there's certain people you're going to know and you're responsible for knowing. And there's certain elements of the music that you have to be able to do, as long as you're here.
Right.
When you're out, you can do whatever you want to do.
Right. I hear you, man. I just give you a very quick anecdote. There was who's the cat? Spike Wilner, who owns Smalls.
Yeah.
Piano player. He started this thread on Facebook about the roots of the music. and where it comes from and experiencing it. And there's this whole long thread and people going back and forth. And this one guy came on, he's a bass player. On his Facebook wall is him playing bass. He comes on and he says, jazz is dead. Jazz is dead. I took such offense that I don't usually do this, and I'm a writer, and I don't do this when I write. I laced into this guy, you know, and then we went off and went privately. I laced into him, you know, and I mean, you consider yourself a bass player playing a music that you're saying is dead. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. But I do think there's a kind of the cultural politics of this is really important, because there are those who apparently want to, if not deny the origins of it, it seems like they want to obscure it or not put the kind of value on it that's necessary. And one of the things you obviously do with your students, you say you've got to know what the history is and the cultural context, even the political context that it comes out of.
Yeah, I mean, I tell them, you're coming from Korea, you're coming from Japan, you're coming from Europe, even you're coming from different parts of the United States. You're not going to know what it's like to be on a cotton field picking cotton.
Right.
You're not going to know what it's like to be stripped of your family, your language, your culture.
Right.
But what you can know is part of the African American tradition is the church. So that's the first thing that I make them do, you know, and I get a lot of Christians from Korea and stuff like that, but you have to experience the African American church because that's the spirit of it, you know. Hearing the pastor speak, it's like a solo. There's a beginning and middle and end. They always talk about jazz, call and response. That's the first answer you get, academic answer. What is call and response? Of course, we can go to the African continent and hear that in the music. But when you go to church, when that minister says something and resonates with the congregation, they respond to it. Right. Or the choir responds to it, or the band responds to it. That's the call and response. Feeling what it feels like to be with people in a like spirit and feeling that energy and feeling how the spirit can move you. Even if you don't know what he's talking about, just feeling. I get a lot of students thank me, you know, thank you because I've never experienced that. I'm like, that's the music.
Okay.
When you're talking about blues and jazz, they always separate it. It's the same, just different contexts in terms of talking about God or talking about my dog or whatever. Right. You know?
Sacred, secular.
It's sacred or secular.
Right.
So I try to get them to get into the roots of the music. Come to Harlem. Eat the food. You know, don't eat too much of the bad stuff. But, you know, eat the food. Get into the culture. Understand who these people are of this music that you like to study. You know, I always say, if I want to study shakuhachi flute, you know, yes, I can get a shakuhachi teacher in New York City, probably easy, and I can study it. But if I really, really want to get to the essence of it and know it, I got to go to Japan. And I got to go to the part of Japan where the shakuhachi is famous and find out those masters and study the music that way. And then I get to the real depth and understanding. My playing will be a lot different than just studying in New York.
That's what they do in the martial arts. You know, it's like, you know, you got to go to where, I mean, you can study here, but those who are like most serious, it seems, they go right back there. And I guess we're talking about how traditions are passed on. Speaking of traditions, we have someone here who is one of the living lights of the music, elder master, Mr. Jimmy Heath. And I want you to, first of all, let's give Mr. Jimmy Heath a hand. When do you recall the first time you heard, either live or on record, Mr. Jimmy Heath?
Yeah. On the EA.
Huh?
On WEA. You know, the Heath brothers. You know, I never thought I would ever meet them, but, you know, you heard the music because they were really popular, you know, in that time. So I did hear the music.
Now, what station was this?
WEAA.
And that's
where? Baltimore, Morgan State.
Ah, okay.
They had another one in D.C. called WPFW that I could get every once in a while. Right. You know, but yeah, I heard Mr. Heath's music. You know, and then of course at Berkeley, you know, you heard of the Heath brothers, and I got to meet Mr. Heath's older brother, Percy Heath. They gave the Modern Jazz Quartet like honorary doctorate, and I remember they had a poster on the wall, and I ripped the poster off the wall, and they were going to get they were getting in a limousine, and I got them to sign it for me. It's on my wall now. They all signed it for me. That's one of my treasures. Okay. But yeah, I knew about Mr. Heath because at that point I made it my duty to study the music. Oh, getting back to Berkeley.
Okay.
Like I said, I didn't know anything about jazz
Right.
other than I had a passion for it and I started listening. So when I got there were guys that were playing changes, transposing songs and stuff. So I would go to jam sessions and, the jerks, they would change keys on me and laugh at me, Yeah, I mean, literally, cats were so cruel. They were really mean to me, man. So I was like, okay, you guys are jerks. So I just spent a lot of time in the library. I would listen. I would practice as much as I can because I had a job because I couldn't really afford school. So I was working. I would wake up like 2 in the morning, cold sweats, and go in the practice room and practice before I had to go to work, before I had class. That's all I did. When guys were chilling in the lobby, I was probably looking at them like, okay, I'm practicing. And that's all I did. And the first thing I did, one of the first things I did, I said, I want to see who the best players are in Berkeley. I don't care about anybody else. So I found out who the best players were, and everywhere they were, that's where I was. I remember
It was
you had Javon Jackson there. This guy Sam Newsom, Arturo Tappan, who's from Barbados, a really famous saxophone player. Then this guy Tony Tuitt, he passed away, great trumpet player. Those were the guys that I kind of followed, and no matter what they were doing, you would see me. Like Javon was in the corner talking to this girl, and I was behind the trash can. I mean, everywhere they were, I know they were like, "What's wrong with this kid?" I'm like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" They were, they would go to it was a place called Wally's. I would go down there and listen to those guys play because I wasn't ready for that yet. But everywhere they were, if they were doing a session, I would have my ear on the door. They wouldn't let me in, but I would just keep my ear on the door listening. Because I said, this is the best of the best. This is what I want to identify with.
Right.
And one of the highlights that happened to me that senior year, that freshman year that changed my life was I got a chance to meet Kenny Garrett. This is before he became Kenny Garrett, right?
This would have been what year?
This is 86.
86. Okay.
Yeah, this is 86. And I remember we're standing on Mass Ave from right across from the college. And a group of us standing, Javon is good friends with Kenny Garrett, and they were coming across the street, and I said, that looks like that guy, Kenny Garrett from the record. and he's like, hey, Garrett, this is one of your ¡1 fans. And he was like, yeah? Oh, yeah? How you doing, bro? So he shook my hand, and I didn't let his hand go, right? I hold his hand, he's like pulling my hand, and I was like, can I get a lesson from you while you're in town? He said, sure. So,
no, wait a second. You said the guy on the record. Now you talking about his own record?
He had introducing Kenny Garrett.
Right.
That was on Crisscross.
Right.
The first thing I heard, before that,
Really?
The first thing that I heard was the one he did with Woody Shaw and Freddie Hubbard called Double Take.
Well, that was after OTB.
Yeah, but that's the first thing I heard.
Man, that was oof. Yeah.
So that was the first. And I remember I was washing dishes before I went to school. I had to get a job, and I worked in this little deli, basically just washing dishes. And my friend came in and put some headphones on. I was like, what's that? He said, it's a saxophone player. I was like, who is that? And he said, this guy, Kenny Garrett. So at that point, I'm in love with the sound because it was something different. It was something emotional that connected with me. So again, I met him finally, and I said, can I take a lesson? He said, sure. So I go to where he's standing. He's on the piano. And he's like, well, let's play. Can you play this? Do you know this? I was like, no. Do you know this? No. Do you know this? No, I mean, basic stuff. Do you know, like, a blues scale or, all the stuff. I didn't know anything. Okay. And I remember he just stopped. He had this look on his face like, what a waste of time. He said, well, young brother, you got a lot of work to do, but just, good luck. Like, good luck. I was like, okay. I was all crushed because I couldn't really be a part of that situation, but he gave me his phone number, which was the biggest mistake, because I called Kenny Garrett 3 times a week for 5 years. And when he was on the road with Miles Davis, I would have conversations with his wife. I mean, I was calling Kenny Garrett all the time about anything and everything. And I said, one thing I said when I left that lesson, I said, you hear how I sound now? You won't be saying that later.
Nice.
I guarantee you won't be saying that later. So what I did, I just practiced. I started transcribing Sonny Stitt, all the stuff that Bill Pearson, all those guys told me to transcribe. I transcribed. I played all the time. If I wasn't working and eating, dinner, I was doing sessions. From sessions, I would do whatever. I just played all the time, practiced 12, 13 hours a day, every day. you know, for most of the time that I was at Berkeley.
I think this guy named Charlie Parker also did that during a period, 12, 13 hours a day.
But he was a genius. I just work hard. You know, so that's what I did. I just worked really hard because I said, I'm starting at this basic level. I couldn't get in good ensembles because my reading wasn't that good and I didn't know anything. Right. So I went from ground zero to by the time I left, I was in all the best ensembles I was doing. And whenever people came to perform, I was in that band. I played with Dizzy Gillespie and Jack D. Jeanette and all those people. I was the guy in that band that they called. I started doing gigs around town. And I just worked my way up and just practiced. That's why I met Roy when he came through, and you know, all the different guys that would come through. I would try to get lessons with them when they played at the Regatta Bar. But I was just that's all I knew. I really didn't have people skills at the time because all I thought about was saxophone. I really didn't know how to talk to people. I just wanted to play. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. Okay. It was an interesting time.
Okay. So tell us about one or two of the most important teachers that you had at Berkeley. You mentioned several of them.
Well, again, I have to thank Andy McGee for connecting me directly with the tradition and forcing me to do the research, you know, instead of just kind of unscrewing my head and pouring it in. He was like, no, you be the scientist, you be inquisitive, find out what it is. If you like that sound, get it. I remember like transcribing Johnny Hodges, I could get the notes and kind of get the inflections, but it was something in the sound that I couldn't get. And I was like, what is it about this that I can't get? I realized Johnny Hodges played double lip. You know,
as did Benny Carter, right?
A lot of the older players did. So knowing that, I was like, well, that's what I got to do.
Now, explain that for those who don't know what double lip means.
Okay.
And show them.
Okay. This is the mouthpiece of the saxophone. Usually, when people play, they take the bottom lip and they put it over the teeth, the bottom teeth, which connects with the reed and gives pressure and things like that. And usually the top teeth go on top of the mouthpiece, right? So you're holding it with your teeth and the lip is the cushion on the bottom. With Johnny Hodges, the way those guys played, it was cushion, the teeth over top of the top teeth and the bottom teeth. So you had cushion on both ends. What it does, in my research, what it does, it allows for more flexibility. You can play a little more relaxed, use different muscles in your mouth. And because of that, having the flesh on top, flesh on the bottom, the reed can vibrate even more. So in terms of, like, if you know Johnny Hodges playing the glissandos and the way he created the sound, it's partly because of that. I think he had the double lip embouchure, and of course his concept of sound. So, you know, it's different after playing one way for many years to do something like that, because it hurts, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and off and on I would do it, but I knew that's what I wanted, so I just started practicing that way. That's the way I play pretty much now.
Look at that.
98% of the time. Wow. You know, there's some give and takes with that, because if a band is playing really, really, really loud and hard, sometimes I have to switch the teeth just to get the strength that I need, but I feel more comfortable playing that way because it really does change the quality of the sound. And that's a whole different science.
All right, speaking of which, tell us what size, I want to capture this, what size mouthpiece you use and what strength reed you use.
Currently I use this Van Doren mouthpiece. It's the V16 model, and it's 8S. It's not like a metal. No, okay. This is hard rubber.
Okay.
I don't like the way metal feels in my mouth. The way it vibrates, it bothers me.
Okay.
So hard rubber. They come in several sizes. I believe it comes from 6 to 9 or something like that. For me, for the amount of resistance that I want and the feeling that I want, this is the best mouthpiece for me.
Okay.
And I also use the ligature, Van Doren ligature called the Optimum, which has metal plates that you can put in at the bottom that help the reed vibrate a certain way according to how it touches the reed.
Ooh, okay.
So, and reeds I use anywhere from 2.5 to 3, depending.
Now the scale, for those who don't know, it goes from 1 to 5, right? 1 being the softest, 5 being the hardest.
The thick, yeah.
The thick, okay.
Yeah,
so you use 2.5 to 3?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it depends on how I'm feeling. You know, the weather change, altitude, depending on where I am, could really change the quality of reed. You know,
And do you scale or chip? You know,
I've been very, very blessed again to having a Reed endorsement. So I don't do any of that. I just put it on. If it works, good. If I don't, I put it back in the box and I try it later.
Okay. But you never.
I went through that. I learned how to make reeds actually, which is a very long process. I found what works for me right now, and I just support that. So I'm very, very fortunate that I don't have to really buy reeds anymore, which is it's a blessing.
What and so the reeds you use that you name?
I use the Java. Yeah, it's a green box Java. And when I play soprano, I use the blue boxes, which is more like a classical reed. It's for the classical players because it gives me the sound that I'm looking for.
Speaking of soprano, we just have a couple minutes for this hour of the tape. We're going to take a little break after it. But you play alto and soprano, right?
Flute.
And flute, okay. For the soprano, who are your models? I mean, you got Bechet, who's the daddy of it, and you have, of course, John Coltrane, who brought it back. And then for me, at least in terms of the quality and warmth of his sound, Grover's sound on
beautiful sound.
Yeah, but for you, I mean, what do you get?
The first guy that really knocked me out with soprano was Branford Marsalis. That was the guy that really touched me. And then, of course, you would go back and listen to Sidney Bechet. When I listen to John Coltrane play soprano, I hear that more say the Middle Eastern Zorna and sounds like that because it's a nasal kind of sound. It sounds like he's really trying to get that sound from that particular geography. Even though it's a beautiful sound, it's just a different quality. And if you hear Mr. Heath play Around Midnight on Ballads, it doesn't get any more gorgeous than that. Right. So, there are a lot of players that have. Steve Wilson has a really gorgeous soprano sound. But the guy that totally knocks my socks out, and Wayne Shorter, of course, Mr. Wayne Shorter, is Branford.
Even today?
Oh, still. Oh, yeah. Branford has a gorgeous soprano sound. I mean, we studied with the same classical teacher, Joe Viola, and but he got deeper into it. He's done some classical records, and he's doing a lot of things like that, but he really understands sound. He plays double lip because all those guys study with Mr. Baptiste. I think his first name was John. Is it John Baptiste? Albert Baptiste. Baptiste. And he taught those guys how to play in that tradition of double lip. So, yeah. Alvin Baptiste. Alvin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, boy. You mentioned viola. That's a legendary teacher.
Yeah. I didn't really get a lot out of it because I wasn't ready for him yet. He usually takes the higher level students. He took me on, and pretty much the whole semester I was playing one or two notes. Just playing in tune. My equipment was kind of faulty.
Okay.
And he helped me at least get my equipment to where I could play in tune.
And then lastly, for this, the altissimo range, did you get that? What's that book that, and I'm trying to think of, Sigurd Rascher?
Yeah.
Did you get that?
I didn't care anything about that.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, later on I did it. The only reason I started playing up there really was playing with Dave Holland and sitting next to Chris Potter and those cats. That's kind of how they play today. And I was like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So I spent 6 months just practicing. I remember Gary Smoling like, Hart, what are you doing? Because I'm like, squeaking. I was like, don't worry about what I'm doing. I'm in the corner. And then about 6 months later, he was like, wow, you're playing up there now. I was like, yeah, I practiced.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's our first hour. We want to give a round of applause to our guests. We're going to take a 5 to 7 minute break. You can go to the bathroom. You can get some water in the back. We're going to turn the lights on. And we welcome you back, and thank you very much.
Cool.
So, Mr. Heath, I'm going to ask you to come up, and I want you to take my seat for a moment. And you had some things that you wanted to say and comment on. All right, so we're starting part 2 of our session with Mr. Antonio Hart as guest of Harlem Speaks. And we have a very, very special guest, his teacher and colleague, an elder master of this music, Mr. Jimmy Heath. Let's give Mr. Jimmy Heath a hand. Now, Mr. Heath has the floor. He'd like to say a few things.
The first thing I'd like to speak on
is that when Antonio was discussing his teacher at Berkeley, Andy McGee, well, Andy McGee and I went to high school together in North Carolina, Wilmington, and actually he was in the next grade under me, and I had the gig in the marching band until he came along and got in the band with me. But then he became a teacher at Berkeley, and he was the one, I think, I have to concur with Antonio, that convinced him to come to Queens College and to study with me when I was the professor there. The other thing I would like to speak on is in November, Antonio and I and Greg Gisbert and John Lee and Benny Green and my brother Albert Tootie Heath went to the Far East, and we went to Taichung in Taiwan. And what happened was one of Antonio's former students, I think, convinced the government over there to give this festival. We played about 3 or 4 days in a park. It was the most beautiful setting. And when we played, there were 22,000 people out there. And kids, very young kids. And we did a master class, too, with these kids. And the kids, one of the kids wrote a note and drew a picture of Antonio. And he says, when you play, Mr. Hart, this is a little girl. She said, your music touches me. And that's what he was just talking about. That was a wonderful experience. And the other thing was when we had this master class, some of the Chinese students there say, well, when are you Americans going to learn how to speak Chinese? And we couldn't say anything after that. Because they can speak English and write it, and they were very astute and listened to the music. The kids danced to the music. And Antonio, as my student, has been like a son. I've never had anybody other than a family, blood family, that feels the same way and treats all his elders with so much respect. He's the most respectful gentleman I've ever met. He's a giver. He and James Moody are the givers in this world, but James passed on. So Antonio's always giving something. So I decided to write a composition dedicated to Antonio. And it was called Like a Son. And of course, Antonio is featured on that, on an album that we made, a big band. And whenever I get a gig and I can get him, he's not busy, I'm gonna have Antonio playing with me. He's learned, as he said, listening to all the old people from my generation and before, how to play lead alto saxophone at a very high level. Because he knows that you have to sing on your instrument. You have to imitate a voice. That's why he likes Johnny Hodges. And I did when I first got my alto saxophone. I wanted to be Benny Carter or Johnny Hodges. And Charlie Parker came along and I changed my direction.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jimmy Heath. Well, what better tribute can you have than that, man?
I'm speechless, man.
Yeah, I tell you. I mean, but for our audience, I've got to say that Mr. Heath has graced us with his presence at various of our Harlem Speaks events. He did a Jazz for Curious Listeners session at the Harlem School of the Arts for us, but he's never graced our Harlem Speaks series so that we could sit down and talk to him about his life and his career. And he promised, and I'm putting it out there, He promised that once his book came out, that he would do it. His book has come out. So guess what? We're gonna book Mr. Jimmy Heath. So y'all keep it. You make sure you keep on the mailing list because I'm hoping that'll happen real soon. So thank you again, Mr. Heath. All right. So now let's go into post Berkeley.
Okay.
Let me ask you, do you want me to use the mic? I mean, this is in terms of what's best for you.
Well, I'm getting you guys clean, so
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, for the audience, excellent.
You
Okay.
guys can't hear us without the mic? Okay.
Is it better with the mic?
Better with the mic.
Better with the mic. Okay. When you left Berkeley, who did you first go with, and was it Roy Hargrove?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, then tell us how you met with Roy Hargrove and what that experience was like.
That's actually funny. I used to run this jam session at this club, Wally's Cafe, and pretty much what that was, if you got to run the gig at Wally's, that meant you were an up-and-coming person. Like Branford had it, Greg Osby, and the name goes on and on. You just knew that you were going to be one of the cats one day. So I was running this gig, and we heard this rumor of this young trumpet player coming to Berkeley. You know, everybody talked about because he had toured already and made a record or something. So we're playing, and this young guy comes in with sunglasses on at night and a blazer, you know, European look, and he had a box of these European cigarettes, and he's sitting there listening to us smoking. He's like, "Yeah, baby, y'all sound good, man. You know." Yeah, and then I'm looking at this cat like, "Come on, bro, are you for real?" And he was like, "Yeah, can I sit in?" Yeah, you know, because we were like, "You gonna come to our town, and you got a reputation. Let's see what you can do."
But you knew who he was.
Yeah, we knew about him.
Okay.
And this cat pulled out his trumpet, and I was like, "Oh, okay." He totally represented. I mean, it was on such a high level, and we had like a really great connect right away. And we played in some bands in college, and I think he left. He didn't finish Berkeley, but I did complete it. And what happened was, before he left to go to New York, he was bless you, he was on tour, and his manager was looking for him when he was supposed to come back. He was supposed to stay with me a couple weeks before school started, and he never showed up. But his manager was like, "Have you seen Roy?" I'm like, "No." And I said, "Well, this is an opportunity." I said, "What are you looking for in your artist?" Yeah, I said, let me just take a chance. He said, "Well, Roy has told me about you, and if something happens, you know, something comes up, I'll definitely keep you in mind." And literally a week later, he said, "Well, man, you're gonna be playing at Birdland in a week." And I'm like, "What?" Birdland. This is when Birdland was up on 105th.
Okay.
You know, next to Smoke. So a week later, we were in New York at Birdland, and it was Ronnie Matthews, Jimmy Cobb, and Walter Booker, and me and Roy.
Wow.
My first gig in New York City, right? I was like, "Are you kidding? That's the guy from Kind of Blue, right?" You know? And, you know, we play our cute little jazz. We play our little standards, and it was during one of those APAP conventions or something where the promoters came. And that was the beginning. I think Roy had just got signed to RCA at that time, and he asked me to join his band. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm there." So I was still completing my music education degree at Berkeley. So I had a year of student teaching that I had to do, and then I would go on the road with him. And like Mr. Heath said, once I graduated from there, my goal was actually to get my doctorate. Let me go back a little bit. Like I said, when I got to Berkeley, I didn't know anything. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen for me. All I knew was I just wanted to play saxophone. I did not have New York dreams. I didn't think I was going to go and make records and be famous. I didn't even care about any of that. All I wanted to do was play the saxophone. I said, hopefully by the time I'm 25 or 26, somebody might let me play on one of their records. That was it for me. You know, so to get with Roy, I think I was 21, and then to get signed to RCA the same year, it was like icing on the cake. And it, you know, in my life, I have to say, my life is actually like everything is icing now, because I never dreamt all of this stuff that's happening. You know, in my wildest imagination, I didn't think about any of this stuff. Having a mentor like Mr. Heath or Frank West or James Moody, people I saw on records. Being a college professor, I just told you how I did in school. That's the biggest. That's funny to me. You know, that I'm actually a college professor. I'm like, wow, this is hilarious.
I don't know. Did we actually say for the record that is Queens College? Did we actually say that?
Now we are.
Okay. All right.
Queens College.
Right.
So everything that happens to me from this point on, like I said, is just icing on the cake.
That's
because I didn't dream it, and I feel very, very blessed. And I feel because I've been given these blessings. I mean, I got to play with Art Blakey. I got to play with Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes and some of the great people that aren't around anymore. There was a reason why God put me in contact with these people. You know, so that's what I try to give that thanksgiving and that respect and that energy and that spirit back to my students, you know, because I've been blessed to be in those situations.
Okay. I'll talk about your playing for a second, because I was aware of you when you first came on the scene, at least on record. And like I said before, you know, that Johnny Hodges connection was so clear to me, you know, and you had such a beautiful sound. I gotta say though, and this is what happens as musicians develop, the difference between you on the early Roy Hargrove records and hearing you, like, it was 2 years ago with Carl Allen and Aaron Goldberg at the Harlem in the Himalayas program that I mentioned. I mean, your playing was like awe-inspiring, man. I mean, so how would you describe what your playing is like now as opposed to like when you first started playing with Roy? How would you describe it? I mean, and you probably have some other people here who could weigh in on that, but how would you put it?
Well, at that particular time with Roy, I was still trying to figure out what it was I was trying to do.
Okay.
You know, I was still chasing Kenny Garrett as well as, like I said, Johnny Hodges and Charlie Parker. Right. So a lot of those guys were major influences, and I was trying to play like that, you know. Through years of being able to play in different bands, the Dizzy Gillespie Band, playing with Dave Holland, playing with Papa Nat Adderley, and different bands that I've been in, the Vanguard Band, the Mingus Band. I've trained myself to be able to fit in everybody's situation. So if I was playing with Nat Adderley, I played like Cannonball. If I played in the Dizzy Band, I played a certain way if Mr. West let me, you know, because I had to follow the master.
Right.
Or Mr. Heath's big band or whatever. Whatever that situation calls for, I play in that particular genre. Not necessarily being comfortable with that. I just trained myself to do that. As of late, I've decided that I have to play who I am and what's inside of me and how I feel the music. And I'm still respectful to every situation that I'm a part of.
Right.
But that's probably the main thing. I've come to a point of loving myself and loving my music enough that I trust it and I just go with it. And hopefully somebody gets it. If they don't, that's unfortunate. Not saying, well, you just have to deal with it. Not that, but just trying to be what I tell my students what an artist is. An artist is the person that when they perform or whatever they do, they tell you their experience. They tell you their story. My story from your story is totally different because I didn't grow up the way you grew up. You know, some similarities, you know, where my belief system might be different from yours.
Right.
That's the way I try to play, you know, just being honest.
Okay. Some years ago, and speaking of Kenny Garrett, when I first heard Kenny Garrett, it was such a different sound on alto, a different approach. You know, if you listen to the cats from Johnny Hodges to Benny Carter to Bird and Sonny Stitt and Cannonball, you know, Phil Woods, Chris Woods, Jackie McLean, you know, and others, you might have thought that all the styles had run out, you know what I mean? Ornette. But boy, he came along and it was really something. So he was a strong influence also. Now, the reason I mention Kenny is because I interviewed him some years ago. And I remember asking him, I said, man, you did that recording with Joe Henderson. So how was it to be up there with Joe Henderson, man, you know? And he said, man, it was great, you know? He says, and I said, well, how did you, in other words, did you kind of feel intimidated? I was implying. And he said, well, no, I just have to be me. And he was one of those ones that had his own sound very early on. Like when he was 21, I think he pretty much had his sound and style. Another thing he also said is that he plays, every time he plays, he tries to play like that's going to be his last time.
Have you guys heard that before?
Every time he
my
plays,
students.
it's like the last time. So, I'm really glad to hear that you're at a place of comfort in your own voice and sound, man, because I tell you one thing, it comes across.
But not saying that I've arrived, because I'm still working hard. I've been working for the last 10 years. Mr. Heath can tell you I'm on vibrato. I'm constantly asking teachers around the world. I've taken lessons from Juilliard. Every country I go to, if it's some kid that plays a ballad and has a great vibrato, I'm like, how do you do that? I just haven't mastered that to the point where I'm comfortable.
Okay.
And I don't care how long it takes, as long as I get it, you know?
Okay.
I'm constantly trying to push myself to understand the vocabulary, how it's developed, how to communicate with other musicians, and the way I write, the way I arrange. So I don't think you ever get to that point where you feel like you've arrived. There's so many things I hear in my sound that I would love to improve on, being more lyrical, more emotional.
More emotional?
Yeah, more
You're
emotional.
very emotional,
Well,
man.
well, thank you, but I feel like, and I really believe when they say you can only play what you've experienced. Like, I have a friend, I talked about him before, Mark, who's an amazing alto player, and I noticed there's some things in his playing that I love that I just can't capture. And thinking about it, I'm like, what's different between Mark and Antonio? We grew up in Baltimore. We have a couple years apart from us. Mark is married. Mark has 2 kids. Mark has a different life. He has a different experience. The love that he has for his wife, the love that he gets from his kids, that resonates in the music that he plays. That's an experience. So there's some beautiful things that I know that want to come out in my playing. I know that, but I haven't experienced it yet for it to come out.
Wow.
That's not a plug to get married either. But, yeah. But
It's out here now.
so I mean, so those are the things when I listen to people that I really like, I'm trying to figure out what is it that makes them what they are.
Right.
I really believe there are 2 kinds of people. There's the musician and the artist. The musician is the one, my students have heard this millions of times, is the one that can read, show up, do the gig, and get paid and go home. The artist can do that, but then the artist, the dreamer, he's the one that's searching, or she's the one that's searching to try to really tell their story or create a condition within their medium that takes people on a trip or takes them out of their life conditions for a second. So I'm trying to figure out how to be the artist.
All right. Well, how many of his current and former students are here? Raise your hand. Okay. Would you all say that your teacher's an artist? I want to hear you now. All right, now I think you got some affirmation.
Yeah, y'all want a good grade.
Since we have master player, master arranger, and we so few times, like when we had Johnny Mandel, we're talking about arranger. I mean, this is one of the master arrangers in this music, Mr. Jimmy Heath. Can you tell us what you learned about arranging from Mr. Heath and what the art of arranging is, from your perspective?
When I was at Queens College, I did take arranging with Mr. Heath, but I was on the road quite a bit at that time. And to be honest, I don't think I got the most out of what I could have learned from him when I was at Queens in terms of writing for Big. I think I wrote a couple charts and they were pretty sad. But the one thing I wrote that was pretty good, though, I wrote a 5 saxophone, like solo kind of thing. I was really happy with that one.
Okay.
It was probably still sad, but I was happy with it. But later on, like I said, as I matured, and there was a time where all I wanted to hear was small band music anyway, but I started to listen to the big bands again, listening to Duke Ellington and Fletcher Henderson and a lot of Count Basie. And then I rediscovered Mr. Heath's music again, the big band music, and I was able to look at some of the scores because he left some in the office. And studying the things and seeing the brilliance of what he does, or watching him behind the piano and how he voices it, and just how he plays the chords on the piano and how he puts it together, because he's always writing. So like almost every time I go over his house, he's playing something for me that he's written. What I get from Mr. Heath is just he always says this about me, but I think this about him. How he said how John Coltrane was always focused and always working and always trying to be, better and higher. And that's what I get from him. He's always writing. He could be at the point where, I've arrived and I'm here. I've done this amount of work, but he's constantly writing, revamping things, writing new sections, practicing his saxophone, practicing his horn every day, guys. You know, if we have people like Mr. Heath writing and practicing every day, you have people like Sonny Rollins practicing and writing every day, and students come to my lesson, they haven't even warmed up yet by 1 o'clock, by 11 o'clock. What are you doing? Why are you playing this music?
Right.
It's that serious. Well, like Kenny Garrett said, he plays like every day is his last. That's a mantra that I give my students all the time. I say, you just don't know what's going to happen. You could leave this classroom and you could never play again. And I would, heaven forbid, that last time you played, you just kind of half played. Is that serious? For me, this music is part of a culture. My culture as an African American, my culture as an American, my culture as a world citizen.
Right.
Is that serious? It's not just picking up the saxophone or writing and playing music for the sake of doing that. This has a serious tradition, and like Mr. Heath's book, talking about, I'm here because of the giants that came before me. And I'm standing on their shoulders. A lot of people sacrifice to create this music that I'm trying to play. So getting back to Mr. Heath, his music just has everything in it. If you really know his spirit, his character, and how he represents himself as a father, as a husband, as a brother, it all comes out in his music. But I always say he's like Mr. Heath and Mr. Heath, they're like two Macintosh computers. They're like so smart, Sometimes I feel like a dummy around them because Mr. Heath, you're like, yeah, Mona, what's that? And she was like, oh yeah, that was 19 such and such and such and such. It's just like all this stuff in the newspaper, and she'll reference a book, and I'm like, oh my God, how these people know all this stuff?
Right.
It's
They've been around a little while.
yeah.
And they study, right. I mean,
There's something about being on the earth for a long time, but I'm talking about just brilliant people,
Right.
Like beyond exceptional people that are above the norm,
right.
But they're real people, giving and loving. So when I hear his music, all the songs that I love of Mr. Heath, which is most of them, they're all about love, Mona's Mood, Gingerbread Boy, it's just incredible music.
Dun, 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 dun. All right. Last question I'm going to ask before I open it up.
That's what I'm talking about. Melody. People don't write melodies anymore. And all the songs that come out is like, sing it back. Exactly.
Right.
Now, you can sing that. That's melody.
Yes. And then Dexter. Don't get me started. Okay, that Dexter solo on that. Woo. Okay. My last question before I open it up. You mentioned about your grandmother's faith. Mr. Heath said that you're one of the most generous people he knows. What role does faith and spirituality play in your life and in your values?
That's everything, I've gone down a lot of different roads, being raised Christian, and actually became Buddhist I was Buddhist for like 3.5 years.
Okay.
And worked my way back to Christian. And as I've gotten older, I really don't claim any of them anymore. I mean, I do belong to a church, but I find, for me, religion is the same. It's like a tree with the roots are the same. As you come up the tree, the branches are the different denominations, but it comes from the same source. Okay. 2 things: treating people with love and being happy. I think that's what the Creator put us here for, to treat people with respect and love and just to be happy. But we do everything the opposite to make life harder for ourselves. without my faith and knowing that, for me, I call it God, whatever you want to call it. I know God is real because it's been shown in my life many, many times. The fact that I'm here right now, that's God. The fact, like I said, that I had loving parents, I had a house, I had food I didn't want for anything. I might not been able to have the whatever, but I had what I needed.
Right.
The fact that I was able to go to college and graduate from college with a degree and go to school and get a master's and things like that's God. Because if you think about it, the cards were against me. I wasn't supposed to do that. I should have been working at home doing whatever,
Right.
you know. The fact that I have these kind of people in my life, like Mr. Heath, the fact that I've been around the world many, many, many times. I never thought that I would ever see these places, you know. I mean, I've been to Paris so many times,
Wow.
you know, where I know it almost as well as I know New York. That I have a position as a professor where I'm able to, in my little way, give back to my students what have been given to me. And this is still going on, you know, it's not even finished, yo. So that can only be God, because it's not me, you know. And I surrender to that knowledge, knowing that the Creator is in control and allows me to do these things. So what I ask every time I play, even when I teach, I ask that God take me out of it and take control of the situation and speak through me. So when you say you hear passion, all I'm trying to do is be a filter and try to connect with that spirit. But I think that's very, very important. When I hear Mr. Heath's music, spiritual. When I hear John Coltrane, like I said, when I hear Louis Armstrong, when I hear Clark Terry, when I hear Slide, almost everybody,
Right.
you know, you feel that spirit in there, you know, whether you call it Jehovah, God, Buddha, Allah. It's just one with many different names.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
Okay. Thank you, man. All right. Well, we're going to open it up for, excuse me, for any comments or questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question going back to your early Baltimore days. You know, when you went the School of the Arts,
Mhm.
you said you were getting the jazz you heard besides your uncle was from WEA. Was there any live jazz going on, like was Gary Bartz around? Well, you know, I mean, was there live jazz that you get a chance to, you know, you weren't of age to go to the clubs yet, but was there any chance, like there was the Left Bank Society?
Yeah, the Left Bank was
which
there.
you could have gone to.
My uncle took me to, it used to be in this place called the Famous Ballroom. And my uncle took me to see the Towson State Jazz Band when a guy named Hank Levy was conducting it, I believe. And trumpet player that we were going to see, his name is Tommy Williams, and his father is Whit Williams, who was like one of my mentors in Baltimore. So I remember going to the Famous Ballroom to see that. I remember going to the Famous Ballroom to see Sun Ra, Children of the Sun. That was crazy, man. People walking around with suns and all these, it was crazy. Yes, Mr. Bartz was around, and I'll tell you a good story. I don't know if I told my mom this yet, but my mom used to bowl in a league, right, on one day of the week, and I used to sneak out of the house that day. Like, she would go bowling, I would sneak out of the house, catch the bus, go downtown, hear Gary Bartz, come back home, and get in the house before she made it. I did this so much, and it was incredible because I saw Woody Shaw, I saw Junior Cook. You know, I didn't know who these people were, and I didn't even know that Gary Bartz was the great master that he is. I just knew it was like this local alto player that could play, and I just went to hear him. And every time I would go with my horn and say, "Can I play?" And for like years, he'd say, "Yeah." I'll have my horn out, and then the night I pack my horn up. He never let me play. He never let me play. And years later, I asked him about it. He said, "I went to see if he was serious." And you kept on coming back, and he was serious. So yeah, I mean, we had a lot of great players in Baltimore. Mickey Fields. Mickey Fields is one of our great heroes. Unfortunately, he didn't get out of Baltimore for several reasons, but when people came to town, they knew who Mickey Fields was. Another great alto player, Arnold Sterling, was another one. You had Ethel Ennis and her brother. She had a club for a second, Ethel's. And you had what's her brother's name? Andy Ennis. And so we used to go to this place called the Sportsman's Lounge. And that was like the organ tradition. So they would be playing. So, that was a great tradition of players. And even though we were young, they knew who we were, and they would let us in the club. It was no alcohol or any of that stuff. But I definitely heard a lot of the masters from Baltimore play.
Thank you for that question. Anyone else? Raise your hand. Anyone want to make a comment? Any students want to say anything about their teacher?
Yeah, say some good stuff.
Come on now. Speak up. Speak up. Let's see here. I'm having a little trouble seeing. Is there a hand up and I can't see it?
No.
Okay. All right.
They don't care. They don't care about me.
Oh, come on now, y'all. Somebody better say something now. Okay. Yes.
Say one. Hi, Mr. Hart.
Antonio.
A couple of things. Number one, you should meet my daughter. Number two, and that's because when I heard your music, and I can't remember, I think I saw you at Schoenberg, I heard you a few other places, but the important thing is that it was so lovely. The lyrical, as young as you are, it was just so, so, so lovely. And we could hear your heart through all the lyrical, everything that you brought us. So, don't stop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heath.
Okay, anyone else?
You guys can ask a question of Mr. Heath too, since he's here.
You know?
Them all hot. Not Antonio, all hot.
All right. Yeah, but really, if any of you like to ask Mr. Heath a question, no better time than now. Carpe diem, seize the moment.
How many times did I tell you guys to go out here live music and try to be around the masters? This is an opportunity that you're going to get that you might not have. You're in a room and you have one of the greatest masters of this music sitting here. And if you guys as graduate students come from different parts of the world, don't ask this guy a question, that lets me know how serious you are.
Uh-oh. So if you didn't have one, you better come up with one. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not a student anymore, but I would like to hear Antonio tell you what it was like to sit in a section with, in a big band with the Slide Hampton Dizzy Gillespie Alumni All-Stars, and have Frank West, James Moody, Jimmy, and he's sitting right next to Frank. And I would be in the audience looking at them, and he's hypnotized. His focus is Frank. Everything that Frank did, he studied. And the idea that he was in that laboratory like a scientist, everything is revealed to you because you're there hearing it at the highest level. And I think he remembers every time he was there. And for young people not to be able to experience that, it's a privilege that the older people had too, because you played with the masters. You didn't have to get it secondhand from a tape or a record or a film. You could be in the space. And that's what I think we're missing in the way the music is being transferred from person to person, because there's always an intervening technology where you don't get the impact.
Okay. So what would you have to say about that? What was that? It sounds like to answer the question.
Well, Mrs. Heath was correct. That's Mrs. Heath. That's Mona Heath. I always approach those situations, like she said, like a laboratory. So I knew Master West had been doing this since Billy Eckstein and playing all these bands. So I knew I just had to pay attention to what he told me to do. So first he was like, "You're playing too loud." Okay. No vibrato. Okay. Cut that off short. Whatever he said. My ego was not that big because I was there to learn. And then when he wasn't talking to me, I would just sit there and watch him. I would just say how, how he was sitting in a chair. I would watch him pick up his saxophone. I would watch him put the mouthpiece in his mouth. I would watch him put the reed on the mouthpiece. I would he would sit there and hear it, hey Antonio, yeah, stuff like that. He would crack me up. And every once in a while I would ask him questions about things, but more so it was just to observe and just listen to what he was doing, hearing the quality of sound, how the sound was produced. I told you I'm inquisitive about vibrato. I was looking at his jaw. Was it moving? How much pressure was on the mouthpiece? How close do his fingers stay to the keys? Does he move when he plays? What does his diaphragm look like? And I would do that for each player, Mr. Heath, Mr. Moody, Gary Smoley, and whoever's in the band. If they're doing something, I want to see what it is. And that's what I do, and translate that to my students, or try to build that into my belief of how I play. I would experiment with, the things that I saw them do. I feel very privileged because I can say I'm probably the last of my generation to say I've actually sat in those kind of bands with those masters. I probably am the last because Mr. West can't really see anymore. We just lost Mr. Moody, so that's why I'm telling you guys to ask questions to Mr. Heath. There's certain things that he can tell you that you're not going to get in the books that you're reading. This guy knew John Coltrane. They were partners. They grew up together. Benny Golson. He played with Miles Davis. He knew these guys. And for you guys to be studying this music and you have the direct link to the source and you don't ask any questions, are you crazy?
Well, let me say this. Partly in defense of your students, I think that part of the dynamic is, we're on tape, we're on camera.
Later for that.
I agree.
For that.
I agree.
This is an oral tradition. This is a music, and you have a master, guys. I talk to you about this all the time. You have a master right here. Ask a question. You might get some insight, something that might change your world, the way you think about the music, the way you hear the music, the way you feel it, by something that Mr. Heath might say, or he might say it to somebody else. You hear it coming from me, but a lot of stuff that I'm saying is coming directly from the master, but you're hearing it from him. So I'm saying, really, I'm pleading with you guys to, no question is stupid. Just ask a question of the master.
And you have some kind of question that you have, and you probably intend to go up to him afterwards or something.
I'm going to tell him not to talk to you.
All right. We're going to give you all, okay, very good.
I have a question of Mr. Hart, which is that you've mentioned a few things that you say to your students over and over again. Are there other sort of principles that you, always want to teach and always impart to your students? Anything that you haven't mentioned tonight already?
Think about music first. I teach a lot of scale theory and things like that, but I always talk about think of the things that make music what it is. I think I did mention this earlier. The sound is the first thing that people get when they hear you, so you need to work on your sound. The way you articulate. I'll give an example. I'll say my student from Greece, Fotis. I say, Fotis, come here. 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 No, sit up. Now, I said the exact same thing, but the way I said it, the way I articulated, the dynamic in which I said it had different meaning. Try not to play one-dimensional. Try to play with multi-dimensions, playing from the softest that you can play to the loudest that you can play. Different kinds of emotion. I always tell them, think about a situation. Think about your favorite food, something that you really, really love, like picture it, smell it, taste it, look at that. You see it, it's there, your DNA is connecting with it. Play that. What does it feel to play that is 18 degrees outside? How do you play that? How do you feel what it feels like to be 80 degrees on the beach somewhere? So it's music with an intention, not thinking just chord scales and harmony and rhythm. It has to be something that connects with you, that's living. You have to see it and visualize it. When I hear Miles Davis play, yes, he's a great trumpet player, and we know the things that he does. But I feel like he's telling me a story, you know. And that's what I try to get them. I'm saying, don't say that Antonio's not telling you to check out the guys that are playing today. Like I said, the Maldows, the Potters, and all the, you know, Mark Turners and all that stuff. But listen deeper. Go deeper into the music. Feel the music. Tell your story. Live some life. You know, go hear the music live. Those are the kind of things I say over and over and over again, because like at Berkeley and some other places I've been, I didn't get that. It was more like paint by dots. This is it. This is the counterpoint. This is how you do it. This is playing jazz. And when I got to the master right here and the other masters, that's not jazz. That's just one dimension of it. You know, the logical part of it, navigation, counterpoint. But what is it that made you want to play music or play jazz? Like I said earlier, it wasn't that you knew the harmony. You didn't even care about what was going on. It's just like when you heard Clifford Brown play that line, you're like, oh my God, that's incredible. When you heard Charlie Parker play the blues, oh my God. When you heard Billie Holiday sing the words to Strange Fruit, you felt something. Even if you came from a different country and you didn't know what she was talking about, you felt that. So I try to get them to feel, you know. Get away from all the technical stuff sometimes and just feel, and then play what you feel. It's hard to do, you know, because you have to surrender to the music. And certain things have to be in place so you can surrender and still express yourself. So you have to have all of that. Being a virtuoso on your instrument goes without saying. If you're playing jazz, you're supposed to be a virtuoso on your instrument. You're supposed to have technique that allows you to get what's in your head, your heart, and get it out of your horn. Did I answer your question? Okay.
You see that smile on her face? You definitely answered the question. All right.
She was like, he's finished, yes.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful speaking with you, Mr. Antonio Hart. Wouldn't you agree? Mm-hmm. All right. So I think that's going to be it for now. I want to thank you and look forward to hearing you play. And thank you for transmitting your spirit and your soul through the music and on to your students, man.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, brother.
All right.